And I am delighted to introduce our first panel. I am going to introduce the moderator, and he will introduce the panel. And I am thrilled to say that the moderator is also a colleague, Frank Baitman, who joined us at DeSilva+Phillips earlier this year. Prior to joining us at Oaklins DeSilva+Phillips, he actually worked at the Obama administration for years. He most recently was the CIO of healthcare, and many of you may have seen him speak at our Harvard Business School breakfast series, where he talked about some of his perspective on what's happening with health tech, having had this lens in the Obama administration. So if you weren't at our breakfast series, you can access the highlights of that on our website. And he, prior to that, worked in other areas of the Obama administration, including Social Security, and was the White House entrepreneur in residence. And earlier in his career did strategy for IBM, so has a unique perspective on what you're going to hear the panelists talk about M&A and artificial intelligence. So with that, please welcome Frank Baitman.
Good morning, everyone. We have an amazing panel, and I'd like to, without further ado, begin inviting them up. Edlin Zhu. Edlin is an analyst with TopBots. Edlin is going to be the one who keeps us honest about M&A activity in artificial intelligence. She has been looking at this area and has some amazing charts looking at how you break down the landscape of that. Next, Pavan Arora. Pavan is Director of Content with IBM Watson. Leo DeLuna, Managing Director of Microsoft Ventures. Cameron Ansari. Cameron is the Head of Corporate Development, or I guess just recently stepped down from Corporate Development at Pinterest, although he's still advising them. And he is a venture partner with Greylock. And Deepak Krishnamurthy. Deepak is Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Vice President of our host, SAP. So thank you. What I'd like to begin doing, and I think it was kind of interesting having that introduction by Martin, what I'd like to begin doing is sort of thinking about your perspectives of what's happening in AI. And I'd like to take maybe a little bit of liberty, if I could, here. And while we call this M&A, I think one of the interesting things that's happening with emerging technologies is companies place bets. They invest in emerging technologies in a variety of ways. And I think when you look at our panel, we have an incredibly rich set of experiences. So we have on our panel someone who is doing corporate development. We have someone who is doing external venture investing. We have someone who's doing internal venture investing. And we have someone who's thinking about it for their company in terms of strategy. And of course, the person who's keeping us honest on all of this. So if I could just begin, Deepak, with you and ask you, how is SAP thinking about artificial intelligence? And how are you balancing that investment internally versus externally versus acquisitions?
Yeah, so if I look at SAP and where we are, like I actually wear two hats. I run strategy and I also run early stage investments like into startups that are building AI applications with our ecosystem. So I have a unique perspective in terms of what we're doing both internally and externally. If I look at internally, it's probably one of the biggest priorities that we have today, right? So it's like any tech company, we are reinventing our stack on AI and machine learning. We're looking to go and deliver the next level of automation, next level of workflow simplification, next level of customer orientation on our products, so that all of these can drive more value. So it's a very customer-centric approach. So it's R&D focused. It's also co-innovation focused. We do a lot of work with our customers, understanding the pain points that we want to try to solve. So that we, like space like this, the Leonardo Labs, we bring in customers and do design thinking sessions in terms of what's the next generation business model going to look like. So looking at it from a business model perspective for the customers, reinventing that, and also like reconfiguring our software for that. That's the way we look at it internally. We also believe that you can't just do it organically and you can't do it internally. And we believe the ecosystem approach is going to be a big part of our success longer term. So what we had done is also started an early stage venture fund, which is complementary to our larger Sapphire Ventures. That's focused on creating an early stage ecosystem, purely focused on AI and ML and leveraging the data that we have in SAP systems to create value for the customers. So we invested we have made 7 investments so far. 6 of them are AI focused, and this other one is more big data and data science focused. So that's kind of pretty much what we do, and we run accelerators in Berlin, San Francisco, and New York City and Tel Aviv most of the focus is AI and machine learning. So it's pretty broad in terms of where we are focusing on in terms of AI, and I think like everybody over here, we believe that's the next big opportunity for the tech industry and for the customers over here.
Right, thank you. You know, it's interesting listening to Martin and hearing your conversation right there. It strikes me, you know, if you go back about 5 years ago, Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world in the Wall Street Journal. Increasingly, I think it's one branch of software that's eating the world.
It's AI eating software.
Yes, yeah, isn't it? Cameron, what did you think about now? Pinterest, of course, has lots of image processing to do and user experience. How is AI playing in that?
Sure. I mean, the thing with Pinterest to keep in mind is that we think of ourselves really as a discovery engine, so top of funnel discovery, top of funnel search, and it's very different than a Google search, right? A Google search is, you know, where's Hudson Yards located? It'll give you the address, the location, the Google map, you know, the Waze for how long it'll take you to get there. Discrete, finite searches are very efficient and perfect on Google. We're not trying to compete with them. We compete on kind of amorphous searches that you may ask a friend or someone else for something on, you know, what are restaurants near Hudson Yards that are interesting? That search is not a great Google search. You'll receive kind of a set of things that may be helpful, maybe not, but if you could get a really curated, great list of predictive items to that kind of a discovery query, that's really what Pinterest tries to do, and that's where AI plays in. It's really trying to be predictive with what a user might be looking for, and even showing different users different results based on prior behavior and what we've learned about them from the system and the algorithm. So it's been a big initiative for us internally. We bought 16 companies in the course of our history, 9 during the time that I've been there leading the function, and several of them have had a heavy AI component. 2 of them in particular, Kosei and Visual Graph. Visual Graph is what forms the basis of our Lens product, which is our image search engine. I can talk more about that. And then Kosei was really what forms a lot of the back end for our search technology. So those guys are all deep in the AI space.
So does Pinterest have any internal investments, R&D investments in AI, or is it strictly M&A?
We've started to recently with the Pinterest Labs. I think one thing that's important to know about AI is to really foster great AI talent, you sort of almost have to have a research lab type, almost university environment within your company where the great AI people can go and learn and talk to each other and spend years maybe work in the basement for something that generates no revenue, right? And if you're comfortable with that, and which many large companies that we compete with like Facebook and Google are, they have very phenomenal groups that do that. I think it's DeepMind is the group at Google. And so these kind of university lab type functions are where AI really lives inside of a company. And at Pinterest, we just launched Pinterest Labs to compete with those folks because otherwise, if you bring, we had a company we bought called URX. One of their talented team members there was a machine learning expert, and we kind of like put him in our ads unit, and he was working on ads products, and he wanted to build models and train them over many months and years. And the ads product team was like, we have a product launch next week, can you please help us with this? And so it was just a mismatch, right? And we ended up losing that gentleman, unfortunately, to Quora, because Quora had at that time a better machine learning group. So I think it's important to have that kind of function if you want to retain great AI talent. And the talent is rare. I mean, these are like, it's like quarterbacks in the NFL. There's like 3 or 5 people that are really, really stellar, and then everybody else. So that's kind of how it goes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to expand on that, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I was recently doing a report on recruiting for AI talent, and as Martin had mentioned earlier, the talent here in this field is so rare. Estimates of like less than 10,000 people in the world with the talent to do the type of machine learning, artificial intelligence that people are looking for. And so to piggyback off what you were saying, I think a lot of people are confused about what AI talent actually means. And what we see is there's 3 main types. There is your core functional like researcher type. So those are the people from universities. And that's why you see a lot of companies partnering with universities, especially those in Montreal, for that talent. And then the second type is your traditional data scientists. And those might be much more applicable. So they take those machine learning algorithms and all that data and then apply them to actual functions in terms of searching on Pinterest. And so they take those and make them more applicable. And then the third type of this new crop of talent is your infrastructure and data warehousing people. Because there's so much data involved in AI, you have to start thinking about your data and your systems completely differently. And so those are the 3 main talents that people are looking for, and they're getting them through different ways, through research labs, through acqui-hires, through flat out acquiring companies.
So Edlin, you stole one of my questions, and I'm no, it's great, it's great. I'd like to go down that path for a second.
Intelligence.
In various subsections of technology, there are capitals emerging around the world, and you mentioned one of them for AI. Montreal is in fact emerging as one of those capitals. I know Microsoft has made investments in Montreal. Where do you see that talent besides Montreal?
So a lot of these global AI talent centers are circled around universities. And the universities, it's really actually a couple professors who are super famous in their field. So you think about the usual suspects. You have MIT and Harvard and those areas, right, in Boston. Montreal, because you have Yoshua Bengio and a few others there. San Francisco, most notably. And then I would actually add then from there, China. As we mentioned, China is making a huge investment. Their plan is to make AI one of the biggest industries by 2030. I myself work a lot with China, and from Tsinghua to the universities in Shanghai, I would say those are probably the global capitals. And then I would also add the research labs. So in Seattle, in DeepMind in London, and then I think even the French government is trying to make their Paris into a capital as well.
Thank you.
I would even add Toronto over there. I think they,
absolutely.
like University of Toronto with Jeffrey Hinton is a big hub. I think New York is emerging. It's with what's going on with Facebook and like Jan LeCun in NYU. So I think there's like not because like I live in New York. I actually think New York is going to be a big AI hub.
New York's the capital of everything, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Leo, how do you think about it? Now, you're from the internal venture investing group within Microsoft. You're making bets on behalf of the company, and sometimes you're acquiring those companies as you run across them.
Yeah, first of all, I've noticed you have a Band-Aid. We have the same Minions Band-Aid, so our kids' stash.
Yeah.
It's
Waterproof.
When I'm this close, I can pay attention. So good morning, everyone. I'm with Microsoft Ventures. We're relatively a new fund, and we're a year and a half old. We invest in early stage companies on behalf of Microsoft, and proud to say we've been active. We've done over 40 investments in the short period we've been around. And I also have been given a card-carrying Corp Dev membership today to speak on behalf of my Corp Dev colleagues in Seattle. So that's my disclaimer when I go, when my facts aren't tight, I'm going to use that as an excuse. But the Microsoft strategy around AI isn't an acquisition strategy, so to speak. It's a strategy around how do we better serve our customers, and therefore, what do we do with our products to help serve them better by infusing AI? So a good example is we've just recently announced Dynamics 365 AI. It's a customer-focused AI platform where folks like HP will use our AI to ingest large amounts of customer tickets, understand the intent, and then use that as a first order of escalation and provide very cost-effective customer resolution. So that's an example of a product. Now on the investment side, our view is we want to go early because I think, as Adam may talk about later on, valuations, when you reach a certain stage for those companies, do skyrocket. So an example would be Element AI in Montreal. We invested in the seed round. We think we've helped validate that opportunity, and then 6 months later, they raised $102 million financing. The valuation I will not disclose, but it was very high. We're happy to be validated that our bet was right. It was a nice multiple. And also, I think a driver of that was, so Element, just for background, they build AI-first solutions. And their customers are large corporations that see the opportunity and the need for AI. But they can't implement those solutions because they can't hire the talent. That's the scarcity value here. And so you have an incubator like Element that will build those AI-first solutions for those corporations. So that's a large opportunity. The joke there is Canadians want to stay in Canada if you give them a good job, a good opportunity.
It's for the health insurance, I'm sure.
And so Element, as you know, their competitive advantage, their PhDs. And so I think when we invested in the seed round, they had, my number's way off, but less than 10 PhDs. But in the subsequent months, I think they're almost up to 80 now. So they scaled tremendously, and that is a valuable war chest right there. So we look for teams, we go early, but really I would just advise for the startups and companies in the room, we don't invest in AI companies, right? We invest in companies that are very laser focused on solving a really insightful key customer problem and using AI as a tool or enabling technology to do it better.
Just to jump onto Canada, I think that like jokes apart, that like the Canadian government does a fantastic job of giving tax credits to entrepreneurs. So that gives them a huge opportunity, especially if in early stage. With tax credits and funding, I think it gives them a leg up, right? So to get started with the MVP.
Yeah, I just on that. I think the Canadian government's thinking strategically too, and saying, we know the talent around AI is the key resource. We've got those folks here. We're going to fund it, and so they've made it a strategic imperative to go provide grants around those research centers. And so we're also proud to say that Joshua Benjo has signed on as advisor to Microsoft, which is a pretty cool thing.
Congratulations. So, Pavan, you are in IBM Research in the Watson. Okay, where are you?
So I'm at Watson, which
Okay.
is no longer research, right? After Jeopardy and the big hoo-ha there, Watson did come out of research, though. You're absolutely right. And just like you were saying, it all started with the Jeopardy challenge. What we recognized was there was something more there that could be applied for, more than just winning $100,000, but perhaps changing IBM and where it stands today, which I think in some way was necessary. And so our CEO took a chance and funded it with, everything we had to say we're making the moonshot bet on AI. And that was in 2011. So we've had some time to mature. We've been through, it was 3 steps forward, 2 steps back for a while. But I feel like we've made significant progress by stumbling. And some of we've kind of figured out the way we think about, so I like Deepak wear 2 hats. I'm the head of data for Watson. I'm responsible for making Watson smarter off the shelf. But I also wear the kind of M&A hat. And I'm I'm part of the deal committee for Watson, so on the team. So, the reason that is because data is part of all of this. There's 4 things that you need, in my view, to build a successful AI business. You need technology, data, expertise, and channel. And when I think about
money.
We're okay with that one.
Cloud computing.
So, to me, our channel is our cloud, right? We can bring a lot of this to bear to technology, but when you think about the hardest thing to do, it's preparing the data, because that's 79% of the effort of building any AI solution. Yeah, it's a survey I commissioned. So I had to survey it, just to commission it, just to get the budget, my resources, my headcount to. You know how it is. I didn't get to 80. I didn't get to 80. It was 1%. So data becomes important, and where we look at you were asking how we think about M&A. Really, Watson is set up as there's a Watson platform, and then we build. IBM is really concentrated less on the consumer and more on the businesses. That's our traditional business. So we're becoming smarter about industries and about enterprise. So what we're doing is we are concentrating a lot of our M&A on the verticals. So Watson Health was, I think it was mentioned earlier that we purchased Truven. Watson Health is a $4 billion roll-up. So we've now launched Watson Finance, Watson Customer Engagement, which is like marketing, and Watson Advertising. These are separate verticals that all sit on the Watson platform. I'm not saying we don't acquire for Watson platform, but the Watson platform is where we really spend a lot of our time and efforts in our research labs on. So that's our kind of our core asset, and we're looking to spin up all these verticals and become the smartest engine out there around those industries off the shelf.
So IBM has taken a slightly different approach in terms of acquisition than some of the other companies here, getting more deeply into the vertical with the weather company and Truven, as you mentioned. Do you see IBM as acquiring principally for the data and the customer relationships to grow the AI business, or is it core technology?
So the core technology would be within the platform. Now we have, because we've had so many years of this, we have significant technology, and we always need to fill gaps, and it's changing ever, and the competitors are everywhere, and it's tough. So we are absolutely looking at those technologies at all times. But at the same time, those are really gap fills. When we're looking to really grow quickly, that's in the verticals, and that's primarily around data, and where possible, enriched data, pre-enriched data that machines can ingest.
Yeah, I think the world is starting to be divided into data haves and data have-nots, right? So you're starting to see like companies acquiring purely for data. I would even argue like the LinkedIn acquisition was largely for data for Microsoft. And the companies that have done very well traditionally, yes, they have had great academics, like people like Jeffrey Hinton coming to Google. On Facebook side have like Jan LeCun come in. But then these guys have tremendous amount of data, right? They have data from e-commerce, from search. The case of Microsoft, like Bing's got 20% market share. Maybe that's still a lot of search data, right? So I think the data piece is super interesting for people. And you guys in Pinterest are also sitting a ton of data, a lot of image data that can be used for training algorithms. So getting access to data either through M&A, strategic partnerships, through investments is going to be a key differentiation going forward for anybody that wants to do AI.
You've also touched on a constraint, though, when you're doing M&A for AI companies, is AI is always applied to something, right? Someone asks, do you buy AI companies? And it's always like AI applied in some way. And a lot of the companies that come through Pinterest from our M&A function is AI applied to image recognition, right? So we've seen probably 40, 50 companies in the past 3 years, from Israel to the UK to New York to Montreal to everywhere, that do that. And they'll come in and say, we're great at recognizing images. We have this big training set. And we ask, well, what's the training set? They're like, about 20,000, 30,000 images. And we're like, look, Pinterest is 100 billion pins. It's not going to scale. And then the engineers in the room kind of roll their eyes and they'll walk out. So it's really hard as a small company when you're building AI applied to these functions to come into a larger entity. And obviously we're much smaller than IBM and some of these folks. But and to have your technology really scale. So then that's where it becomes almost entirely a talent acquisition, right? Where it's like, well, we're going to shelve whatever you've built, and then you can come rebuild it for us here and take 5 years to do it.
And just on the image piece, right? Like most people train their machine learning algorithms on ImageNet or something that's openly available. So these guys have a phenomenal amount of proprietary images, which could theoretically get much better results in terms of facial recognition or product recognition.
But even ImageNet, just as an example, it's this really, really small set. So you still can't get, because you can't build enough of a ground truth to get anything seriously significant, like you were saying, Cameron. So to me, data is the big gap to learn around verticals. So anybody who has, from my perspective, enterprise interesting data around a certain vertical that's even perhaps has some meta tags around it, wow, we want to meet you.
So Edlin, just picking up on this right here, you advise companies on M&A activity in artificial intelligence. It's been said that artificial intelligence is all about people and data, not algorithms. The algorithms are, in fact, increasingly being sourced there. So when you advise a company on M&A activity, what do you tell them about that?
Yeah, so background, what we do is we work with Fortune 500 companies to help them understand artificial intelligence, so a lot of the education part. We also do research and then advise them on just how do you incorporate AI into your business? How do you create an AI strategy? How do you transform? How do you create a team around that? So this is all what I live and breathe every single day. But in terms of your point, yes, data is huge. Data, like you'll hear, is analogous to the oil these days, right? It's just as expensive. It's like your gold mine that you're sitting on. And then the people, the talent is also really expensive. Just a New York Times article that came out earlier this week was saying that the average salary of a person with a PhD or a master's equivalent and maybe only a couple of years of work experience is commanding $300,000 to $500,000 annual salary. So that's someone who's in their late 20s is doing pretty well. And so when we think of, and so your question was earlier.
So
Yeah.
Thinking about data,
Yeah.
people, and algorithms, what's most important and how do you advise?
So I would say definitely people. So when I first go into a company, we ask, how are you thinking about it? Does the CEO actually understand AI, or does he even care about it? Do you create a team around it? Do you hire a CIO, or do you have a chief technology officer or a chief data officer who understands a lot of these things? And only from there can you actually create a team and a strategy around it. And as part of that strategy, you might be, one, hiring more people, or two, to acquire the data, whether it's through acquisition or partnerships or other things. So first you have to have actually the human people, and then you figure out the data in other parts. And then in terms of the algorithms, while they are very important, a lot of it is open source these days. I mean, Google and Facebook, they're publishing a lot of their research, and and so it's all publicly available. And so their most defensible thing is actually their data. So I would say people first, then data, and then algorithms.
Fascinating. It really is. You know, in technology, we tend to think intellectual property is everything, but increasingly it's data and people.
Yeah, the algorithms have been around for a long time, right? So the first, machine learning algorithms is 80s when Jeffrey invented backprop. So it's been around for 35 years. Like deep learning has been around for 20 years or so, like since you did LSTM. So you have these algorithms been around. It's only now with the cloud computing, cheap cloud computing, with the data availability, with people coming in and doing these massive, kind of transformation initiatives with a lot of money. To your point, is why AI is a reality today. So it's the algorithms. I think the interesting thing going forward is, like, as people become scarce going forward, data, you have data, what I call silos and walled gardens of data coming in. Is there going to be an opportunity for innovation in the algorithms? I think the next generation, today the algorithms that you have aren't really smart, in the sense that you need to put like 15 layers or 100 layers sometimes in a deep learning algorithm with a lot of cloud computing to make them work, and with a lot of data. So how do you build out algorithms that are smart with low data, low computing, and that's going to be the future in terms of how you can get to the next level.
Yeah, and to that point, a lot of people ask, is AI hyped right now? And do you guys think it's a little bit hyped? We think it's pretty hyped, and I was talking to Jeffrey Hinton actually 2 weeks ago, and he was saying that, yes, it is hyped, and we will be in big trouble, us AI people, if there are no major improvements in the algorithm side.
Yeah, on the hype topic, right? It's we see waves. What the latest trend or marketing vernacular is that starts to latch onto it. And lately it's been AI selling SaaS and IoT. But early on about 10,000 or was it 8,000 practitioners of AI? AI is a team sport, right? So you just can't hire one AI person to implement that in your company. And so sometimes you just have to call BS on a pitch when you see that, or if you're a vendor trying to sell something. And so just because you pivoted 6 months ago and now AI is plastered all over your PowerPoint, that does not make you a solution that people should actually invest in nor buy as a customer.
So you're touching on acqui-hires actually too. So Cameron, why don't you tell us, URX was an acqui-hire, wasn't it?
URX was largely an acqui-hire. I mean, I was going to tell you one of the examples, to your point on the talent level, and there's very few people, is one of the first things I did when I started was I went to the head of Visual Graph that we bought, that company. He's one of the renowned experts in the world on image recognition. And I went in with kind of 5 or 10 companies that were interesting, wanted to sit down with him and kind of walk through it. 30-minute meeting, and I go to the whiteboard, write the names of the companies, kind of looks at it, and then he goes next to the list of companies I'd written, and he writes like 8 names, and he says, look, here are the best 8 people in the world that do video recognition or image recognition. And he's like, this guy's at Harvard, this guy's at Google, this guy's at Facebook, this guy's at Berkeley. He went down the list, and he's like, unless you bring one of those people, let's not bother with any of these things. And he just kind of walked out of the meeting. I was like, all right, well, got 20 minutes back. That was great. But that's kind of how it works, right? If you're really going to expend the money and resources to chase down an expensive acquisition, in some of these spaces, there are very, very few people that are really worth doing that for and building a team around, right? Where people are going to gravitate, want to come work for and with a renowned expert in a space.
So when that team gels, it's good as gold, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin and his team are again, they're if you go to the Pinterest app today and you click the camera and you're able to take a picture of this chair and it recognizes all the chairs that are similar to it and where you buy them, that is all built on Kevin and his team's technology.
So what might be interesting is talking a little bit about valuations. We've touched on it a little bit. If you could just go through, I know that you've acquired a number of companies in Watson, some very large companies like Truven. How do you determine those valuations, and how do you determine if it's acceptable for the IBM business?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a very, very baked out, I mean, you know it well, a very, very baked out process. We've got, it's almost like we have an investment bank in our company, and so we have a very specific process that we go through in order to figure out, great, if this company were to survive on its own, there's a standalone case, and then there's a synergy case, and there's that wedge. And the synergy case, how it affects us, is what really matters. And so if they have the data, if they've got some technology, and honestly the people matter right now the most, particularly for our platform, so we can steal as many of them as possible so he can't get them all, then we're gonna, then that's how we value it. But quite honestly, we've had to shift our model. We had to shift our thinking because the old way doesn't work. These valuations are frothy, just to put it lightly, right? So honestly, we found that either you go early, the way you're going at, or you're going very, very late, where there's revenue and there's a multiple, there's an EV multiple that makes sense.
Right.
Not these pre-revenue $500 million, billion valuations that you'll see every now and then.
So our talented employees worth $13 million each?
Depends on the employee and the use case, because honestly, my one concern about there's this massive acqui-hire play, and that's really short-lived. It always is. In any new business, everything will start to equalize in the next 3 years. So if you can get significant value over the next few years, it can't be a 10-year case. It can't be a SaaS model. It's got to be a 5-year case if it's an acqui-hire play.
Yeah, I agree. It's got to be, like, now you got to have a conviction that the team's going to stay. Right. The team's not going to stay for the next 3 to 5 years. 3 years is minimum. 5 years is ideal, because you're trying to bootstrap an initiative that is completely new, and you want the talent, and you're going to build around this talent, right? It's not as though you're going to acqui-hire these 15 people and then like leave them to go build everything. Then you're going to go and hire another 20 people around them, because it's probably one rock star PhD guy who's really a guru in something that he or she does. And then what will happen is then they will hire like 15 more people, and then you kind of build a business around it. Now, if you don't have the conviction that she's going to stay or she's not going to stay, you're not going to do this deal.
Right.
I will say that, I mean, AI is absolutely I think as Joanna mentioned, the arms race right now on the M&A side, where, you know, if we ever saw a competitive process these past few years, you know, if I was looking at an ad tech company, you know, occasionally you'd see somebody else in there, maybe, you know, Snapchat or somebody. If it was like consumer internet, again, you know, maybe you see Airbnb or somebody. But I never saw Facebook or Google competitively on deals unless it was AI.
As an example of an acquisition we did is a company called Maluba, again in Montreal. So I could go back to Montreal as a center of excellence for AI. And Maluba is a deep learning research lab. And Yoshua Bengio is one of the founders, co-founders of Maluba. And we actually initiated a conversation with Maluba for an investment on the Microsoft interest side. And then quickly realized how core this is, and then got wind that it could get pretty competitive not only in the financing, but also potential M&A. And then very quickly flipped it over to our business development folks, who said, yeah, this is pretty core. So proceeded to close the story, right? We acquired Maluba in January, and now they are, you know, very front and center for us in deep learning natural language processing, trying to help systems talk to each other and with humans. So that's very core. Was it an acqui-hire? When I think about acqui-hires, I think you strip out everything they've been working on before, and then hope they stay, because there's no passion for them to stay beyond the golden handcuffs. So I think that's another thing of how you integrate actually this class of very highly accomplished professionals who are passionate about what they're doing, and then give them incentive to stay and give them a purpose.
So are you facing serious competition from Facebook, Apple, Google? Is that driving valuations through the sky?
We've got Microsoft research. We have 8,000 people at Microsoft organized around the AI effort, and one of our greatest concerns is they get poached a lot, right? And I think you can probably get more stats of ex-Microsofties who have AI backgrounds than other companies. But yeah, it definitely drives up valuations. And then again, China is an interesting play because they're making investments, and so there are $10 million guys and gals getting recruited.
Wow.
We have seen probably 25 deals in the last 12 months that we have been somewhat participating in, and pretty much like in every deal, like you have the usual suspects. You have at least Microsoft or IBM, and and if it's a core tech, then Google would be there. So it's definitely like we're seeing a lot of competition, and that's what's rising and Cisco and everybody, like anybody that's doing anything to do with enterprise tech with large balance sheets, they are in this, because at the end of the day, if you have like 20, 30 billion in cash or more, this is so strategic that 500 million for like zero revenue is still, you can make the case for it.
But I'll say what's really interesting is that, and it's true with SAP and us, for example, it's co-opetition everywhere because everybody knows it's greenfield. Everyone's got to be in it. So while we might be competing on an acquisition, we're partnering on something else on AI,
Right.
because they may have the data and we may have the tech and what have you.
Well,
But
example of that with Alexa and Cortana, just announcing a partnership, right? Jeff and Satya. So that's case in point there.
That's pretty unexpected, actually. So why don't we talk about how you integrate one of these acquisitions when you bring it in? So Cameron, you talked about URX, for example. How do you make sure that, first of all, the people stay, that the IP that is in fact acquired finds its way into Pinterest products?
Well, I think we touched on this a little bit. I think you sort of have to have almost like a labs group that you're willing to dedicate resources to, and acknowledge that it may not generate meaningful revenue or product for a little while, and then have those people kind of parachute in or work alongside the product teams on releases that make sense. But we learned that over time. Again, we on the URX deal, we lost a great person because we didn't really have the right role for him. So I think it's really important. And then we also spend a ton of time, as I'm sure you guys do, before a deal happens, we make sure we know where every person is going to work, who their manager is, like where their desk is. Like, it is not the kind of thing where we'll buy a 20-person company and be like, all right, we'll figure it out later, and you guys can go anywhere. Because we're a small team, it really comes down to exactly what position someone's going to have, which I think helps with retention over time, so that there's not like an ambiguity around, well, they're going to work on this thing, but I'm not sure. So I think that's really important to do, and it means that in some cases, with a very small team, and we've had cases where it's a 2-person team, 3-person team, where it's like, well, we're going to take you, but I'm really sorry, like, we just don't have a slot. It's a very awkward conversation, but we've had to have it a few times.
I'll say that this is one of those things that we did not so well in the beginning, and when we got better at is we're pretty big and we'll screw them up. And so we leave them alone in the beginning. And then we have an integration executive who moves there, sits with them, and takes them slowly through how do they leverage our channel, our sales team, our tech, our research, and then let integration happen almost organically. Like the weather company still is the weather company right now. And it'll happen as it happens. If you push these things, sometimes you lose the value as the people start to get integrated and dispersed, and the team doesn't have the same mission.
And if they're university professors as part of these teams, a lot of times you will never require them to leave their university posts, so they always have dual posts. And it's a benefit to the company itself as well, because the university professor can continue recruiting their own students on the side, and it becomes kind of a pipeline into a job at Pinterest.
Brilliant.
We have a guy like that from Kosei who still, I think, teaches at Stanford.
Leo, you mentioned a company you were looking at to make an investment in, and the more you looked at it, the more you realized you needed to own the company and take it off the market. How did you go about that acquisition and then integrating that company who was thinking about growing independently into the big old Microsoft?
Yeah, so that was Maluba, which I mentioned earlier on. I don't have great insight into the actual integration play, but as a whole, in general, we have very dedicated folks who do integration. So I'll even bring it home to a smaller team. It's a 2-person acquisition on an AI company, and our integration expert, she sat with them and got their kids in school because they were moving to Seattle, and so that was happy home first, right? And so then they could then focus on the job at hand. Yes. So there's a high touch.
The other thing about integration and AI is not one product, one technology. Right? It's probably like hundreds of different technologies. Like you have machine vision, you have audio, you have NLP, and you have then on the and then on the algorithm side, deep learning, reinforcement learning, all of these different things that you can actually do integration. You can big small companies your broader platform or your data. And that's kind of the way like most companies are thinking about it, because it's just not one product that needs to be integrated.
Just on closing on that, the Microsoft, there's been a cultural change around Microsoft with Satya taking the job, right? And so he just embraces innovation and wants to take it in. And so some of our acquisitions, the folks in those teams get promoted to pretty senior positions within Microsoft. And then it's that, one, it keeps them there because it's giving them something else to focus on, but it gives them kind of a bigger project. But then it also, with the benefit Microsoft gets, is that even a more cultural infusion beyond the technical perspective.
I'm going to open this to questions from the audience after one more question. Leo, you mentioned something the other day that I thought was quite interesting. Microsoft has a specific venture investment fund to invest in AI for good. Joanna talked before about some of the dark side of AI. Microsoft is making a specific attempt, as are other companies, to make sure that AI turns out good. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah,
so we have a specific AI fund. The guiding principles there are it should be about human augmentation, right, and not about human replacement. So there is respect for the dignity of the worker. And examples would be a company like Livongo, and then also chronic helping with disease management is another example. So Livongo it helps manage your diabetes as a chronic illness, and through a mobile meter, it will track your insulin levels. But more importantly, the AI aspect is a very direct line to a coach that will alert you, contact you, and then coach you if you have some issues. But it can't be a one-to-one relationship because it doesn't scale. So they're using AI to help that coach then manage a larger population of patients.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And then another example, because we Element AI, by the way, is in that fund. Other things we think about are knowledge workers. So we've got a company in New York actually called Agolo, where they focus on natural language summarization. So for the folks in the room, particularly the bankers, this will resonate. There's too much information overload, or too much information to process, and then as a knowledge worker, then synthesize that information and make insights. So what Agolo does, an example would be if an analyst is looking at a Tesla 10K, for instance, typically you would take 17 hours to read it, deconstruct it, and then write a report. Now, if you feed it through Agolo, it'll write a summary in 1.7 seconds. So that disintermediates that whole group. So you've got the banks and Wall Street are looking at that and saying, how do we leverage our really talented asset to help them, at least from a front line, get better use of their time?
That's great. Questions from the audience? Yeah.
Let's go deeper into the talent issue, because it appears to be different strata of that. But what makes the perfect skill set? You have science, statistics, business acumen, the ability to interact with others nicely. It seems like quite a mix there.
All of those and more. But I would say the key things that people are looking for in this person is, one, mathematical and statistical background. That is probably number one. Number two, I think a curiosity, which is a little bit different than a traditional programmer, because there's a lot of times no right answer, and there is constant upgrading and tuning the algorithm. So that's like not a one-time it's done. You constantly change. And so in terms of an algorithm, how it's done is you give it different weights, and you're trying to do, like, if you're bankers here, y'all did statistics back in the day where you're trying to find like the curve of regression to regression line. And so with deep learning, a lot of these things, you're trying to find that line to minimize the error rates. And so someone who's really good at statistics and mathematics is great. Someone who has a curiosity, constant learning, who's okay with ambiguity, and then someone who can communicate as well. But I think usually that's kind of lower on the list because there's so many other things that people want to focus on first.
Any other?
I would say leadership quality. I mean, I think someone mentioned being able to envision the people that you're paying a lot of money for in these acquisitions taking senior roles inside the building. And so, for example, one of the guys that founded Kosei is now the CTO at Pinterest 3 years later. So to have those kinds of folks come into the building, I think be able to vet for that when you're doing diligence on the deal in terms of have they been a great leader at their company, have they hired great people want to work for them, is important.
Right. Deepak.
Yeah, sure.
this is one area where business acumen is probably the least important skill. And this might sound like counterintuitive, because data is the most important thing. If you're able to go use, like if you're a good, you know, computer science, you understand how like algorithms work, and then you have access to data, business acumen often becomes noise. Like it's a prejudice that you're trying to go and solve for. So yes, you need to have some business acumen to go and figure out the hypothesis and the areas that you need to go and explore.
But you don't want bias.
You don't want bias, and then like sometimes like data is going to come up with something completely counterintuitive that your business acumen would probably stop you from going after that.
Thanks.
So I would agree with all that. It's data engineers. Now, by the way, one of my data engineers said to me the other day, a data scientist is someone who just doesn't know how to code. That's what. But a data scientist will say a data engineer is just someone who doesn't know how to do correlation ratios and stochastic models and what have you. So you will have a little bit of what you said, like there's a little bit of that personality, someone who gets along, but it's important to have those data scientists or engineers and people who can develop. There's definitely, you need that kind of thought leader who can really think about what's the commercialization of this product and who understands who can translate the data science and the research guys. We have an amazing, huge, renowned research team, and they're phenomenal. But I wouldn't take any one of those guys to be able to commercialize anything, right? They're generally not the same people. So you need one of those who kind of thinks about, I can take that equity research piece and structure it and automatically plug it into a model for Morgan Stanley, right? So that they can ask better questions on the analyst call. Yeah, that kind of thought process has to be there. The data engineers who implement it. But then the one piece that I think we missed out on is the data sourcing. You need somebody who has that understanding of how to get that data without paying an arm and a leg for it, and do those partnerships. So those are the three in my view.
Other questions? Yeah.
What are some of the emerging business use cases that you're seeing that are the largest opportunities out there?
So I'll tell you that for me, at least, AI is not just, it's right now people are talking about it as conversation. That's the sexy one, right? But AI is so much more. It's a platform with machine learning and deep learning that will allow you to do everything from discovery to conversation to recommendation to decision to augmentation to personalization to automation and so on. The biggest opportunity in the beginning was discovery and conversation. We're now seeing that everything is about augmenting for decision, better decision making. And I would say the large majority, right? And that decision may lead to a trigger that does automation, but everything is about making better decisions nowadays. That's like, I would say, a large majority of what we're seeing. Less so about conversation as it was in the earlier days.